Hakeem Jeffries smirked into the cameras, fully expecting to deliver a fatal, televised blow to the Supreme Court, completely oblivious that Donald Trump sat waiting across the table with a single glossy map of Virginia, ready to annihilate his entire maximum warfare narrative on live television. The Capitol sits in a suffocating silence tonight, a silence bought and paid for by 2 months of a paralyzed Department of Homeland Security. It is the kind of quiet that only exists when the gears of a nation have been intentionally jammed by the very people sworn to keep them turning. They tell you they are saving democracy, while they systematically tear down the very pillars that hold it up. They lecture you on unity, while they sharpen their blades for a declared maximum warfare against half the country. Think about the sheer, unadulterated paradox of it all. To protect the vote, they redraw maps in the dark of night to ensure your vote never counts again. To preserve the law, they declare the highest court in the land illegitimate, simply because a single ruling did not go their way. It is a game of shadows played on the cold marble of D.C., where the lights of the cameras do not reveal the truth, they hide the rot. For 60 days, TSA agents worked without pay. Coast Guard families wondered how they would buy groceries, and FEMA sat in a state of limbo. And why? Because the radical left's hatred for the men and women of ICE outweighed their duty to the American people. They held the safety of your family hostage to protect a narrative, advancing a secret agenda to dismantle the borders and the rule of law piece by piece. The flashes of the press cameras tonight feel like strobe lights in a horror movie, shattering off the white stone as 2 men prepare to face off. Hakeem Jeffries sits there, adjusting his microphone with the smug confidence of a man who thinks he has already won the war of optics. Opposite him, Donald Trump leans forward, eyes narrowed, looking exactly like a man who has seen every trick in the swamp's playbook and is fully ready to burn the script. We have to be honest about what we saw today. What we witnessed was not just a political spat, but the complete exposure of a radical agenda that has no business in this building. Jeffries barely blinks, his voice dripping with a rehearsed, clinical disdain that he has honed for the evening news. The American people need to understand that what happened with the Supreme Court isn't just a disagreement, it's a crisis of legitimacy. That court, as it stands, is no longer the Roberts Court. It is the Trump Court, and it has become an illegitimate body that exists only to undermine communities of color. Trump lets out a short, dry laugh that echoes against the vaulted ceiling. It is the kind of laugh that tells you he is about to dismantle someone's entire world. Illegitimate. That's a big word for someone who loved the court when they were ruling for the left's favorite causes. But now, because the Constitution was actually followed, because a racial gerrymander was struck down in Louisiana, suddenly the whole institution is a conspiracy? You stand in front of these cameras and tell Americans the highest court has no legitimacy, yet you're the one trying to burn the system down because you lost a case. It's banana republic stuff, Hakeem. And frankly, it's the language of an authoritarian who can't accept that the rule of law doesn't bend to his political will. Jeffries shifts in his seat, his fingers tightening around a stack of papers that contain the new redistricting maps for Virginia, the real maximum warfare weapon. This isn't about losing, it's about voter suppression, plain and simple. When the court strikes down districts designed to give a voice to the voiceless, they are engaging in a grand conspiracy to rig the 2026 midterms before they even start. The narrator watches from the shadows, noting how Jeffries invokes the names of civil rights icons to mask a cold, calculated grab for partisan power. Voter suppression? That's rich, coming from the guy whose party just pulled off the most blatant gerrymandering scheme in modern history, over in Virginia. Trump fires back. Let's talk about Virginia. Let's talk about that special election you pushed through so you could redraw maps in the middle of a decade. You want to take a competitive 6-5 delegation and turn it into a 10-1 Democrat landslide in a state that was basically purple. You carved up Prince William County into 5 different pieces, 5, just to dilute Republican voters and pack them into a corner where they can't be heard. And then you have the audacity to sit here and talk to me about saving democracy while you're literally rigging the maps in the back room. Jeffries finally snaps, the clinical mask slipping just enough to show the raw partisan ambition underneath. It's called maximum warfare, everywhere, all the time, and we aren't apologizing for using the tools at our disposal to ensure a fair outcome. If that means everything is on the table, including what we do about the Supreme Court once we take back Congress, then so be it. Trump's expression turns to one of grim satisfaction. He has successfully lured the villain into saying the quiet part out loud. Everything is on the table. That's code for court packing, Hakeem, and we all know it. You don't want justice. You want a rubber stamp for whatever radical policy you can't get passed through a fair vote. You're threatening to destroy the independence of the judiciary because you're a low IQ individual who doesn't understand that a republic requires institutions that don't change every time you have a tantrum. The air in the room feels even thinner now, the weight of the 2-month DHS shutdown hanging over them like a ghost. And let's not forget how you treat our actual security, Trump continues. You shut down the Department of Homeland Security because you hate ICE more than you care about our borders. You called them a violent mass deportation machine, while human traffickers and gang members are laughing at our wide-open gates. You held the paychecks of TSA agents and the Coast Guard hostage for 60 days because you'd rather score points with the radical left than fund immigration enforcement. Jeffries stands up, his voice rising, trying to regain the moral high ground that has already crumbled beneath his feet. We celebrated reopening DHS without giving a dime to your machine of violence, and well, do it again if we have to. The people of this country are tired of your institutions and your walls, and 2026 is going to be the year we finally tear them down. Trump remains seated, looking up at Jeffries with the calm of a man who knows the American people are watching this meltdown in real time. You keep talking about tearing things down, Hakeem. But some of us are interested in building this country up and protecting the people you've abandoned. Go ahead. Keep calling the court illegitimate. Keep rigging the maps. And keep declaring maximum warfare on half of America. The voters see the hypocrisy. They see the double standards. And they see exactly who is really attacking democracy tonight. As Jeffries turns to leave, the narrator notes the irony. The man who claimed to be the savior of the system is the one leaving the room in a state of partisan fury. The echoes of their confrontation linger in the empty hall, a haunting reminder that the soul of the Republic is currently being fought for in the dark. The fight for 2026 hasn't even reached its peak, but the battle lines are drawn in permanent ink. The air in the hearing room tonight feels heavy, like the atmosphere before a summer storm that never quite breaks, leaving everyone drenched in the humidity of political tension. You can smell the old wood of the dais, the stale coffee of the staffers, and the sharp metallic scent of 1,000 electronic devices humming in unison as the cameras prepare to broadcast the charade to a skeptical nation. Across the room, Hakeem Jeffries sits with the rigid posture of a man who believes he is the protagonist of a history book that hasn't been written yet. He reaches forward, his hand moving with a calculated, slow grace to adjust the neck of his microphone, the small clatter of plastic on metal echoing like a gavel through the hushed gallery. There is a terrifying level of confidence in his eyes, the kind of confidence you only see in people who truly believe that the rules of the game are whatever they say they are at any given moment. He clears his throat, a sound that is less about preparation and more about command, ensuring every ear in the room is tuned to his frequency. Let us be very clear about the crossroads we are standing at tonight, because the American people deserve to know the truth about the forces arrayed against their interests. Everything is on the table, and I mean everything. Because we are no longer playing by the old rules of a system that has been hijacked by a radical minority. Once the power balance shifts in 2026, as the polls and the will of the people clearly indicate it will, we are going to take decisive action. We will ensure that the Supreme Court is no longer an illegitimate institution that exists solely to strip away the fundamental rights and the voices of the citizens of this great country. The word illegitimate hangs in the air like a poisonous fog, a direct assault on the third branch of government, delivered with a straight face and a designer suit. It is the language of a man who views the Constitution not as a shield for the people, but as a hurdle to be cleared on the way to total partisan control. Donald Trump, seated just feet away, doesn't explode with the anger the media vultures in the back of the room are praying for. Instead, he tilts his head slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It is the look of a seasoned player who just saw his opponent overplay a very weak hand. It is a smile of deep, cynical recognition, the kind of smile you give when you catch a magician trying to hide a card up a sleeve that is already torn. He waits for the silence to stretch just long enough to make the room feel uncomfortable, letting Jeffries' radical declaration sit out in the open, where everyone can see it for what it is, illegitimate. That is a very interesting choice of words, Hakeem. Really, it's quite a word to throw around in a building that is supposed to be the heart of our republic. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm wondering if you even hear yourself, or if you've just spent so much time in the echo chamber of the radical left that you've forgotten what law actually looks like. Is that really what we're doing now? Is that the new Democrat standard? An institution is only legitimate if it gives you exactly what you want, when you want it? Trump leans closer to the microphone. It's a funny thing, because I remember a time not so long ago when you and your colleagues couldn't stop praising the Supreme Court. You loved the court when they were making laws from the bench. You loved them when they were ruling for your favorite liberal causes. And back then, the court was a pillar of democracy, wasn't it? But now, suddenly, the court decides to actually read the text of the Constitution. They decide to follow the law as it was written by the people's representatives. And you call them illegitimate. Hakeem, that's not a legal argument. That's a tantrum. And it's a dangerous one. Because you're telling the American people that our highest court has no authority unless it obeys the Democrat Party. Trump shakes his head. Think about that word. Illegitimate. Coming from the House Minority Leader, one of the top Democrats in the country, telling Americans to ignore the final arbiter of constitutional law. It's banana republic stuff. It really is. It's the language of an authoritarian who thinks that because he lost a political spat, he has the right to burn the whole house down. Jeffries narrows his eyes, his mask of clinical calm beginning to fray at the edges, as the logic of the trap starts to close around his rhetoric. This isn't about political spats, and you know it. It's about a court that has been packed with ideologues who are out of step with the American majority. When the court strikes down a district in Louisiana that was designed to give minority voters a seat at the table, they aren't following the law. They are engaging in a partisan hit job. They are ignoring precedent and the Voting Rights Act to ensure that your version of America stays in power at the expense of everyone else. Trump doesn't let him finish, leaning into his own microphone with a sudden, sharp intensity that shifts the energy of the entire room. Let's talk about that Louisiana ruling, since you're so eager to bring it up. Because this is where the hypocrisy really starts to smell. The court looked at a district that was drawn specifically based on race, a snake-like district that even the majority opinion said was designed purely for a racial outcome. And the court said, No, you cannot do that. It is unconstitutional to draw lines based on race. It violates the Equal Protection Clause. That's not how America works. Now, to most normal people, that sounds like a win for equality. It sounds like the law is being applied fairly to everyone, regardless of what they look like. But to you, because it didn't help your preferred political outcome, it's a conspiracy. It's voter suppression. And it's the Trump court dictating decisions. It's delusional Hakeem. It's conspiracy theory-level thinking from the guy who is supposed to be a leader in Congress. Trump points directly at Jeffries. You sit there and cry about voter suppression while your party is currently engaged in the most blatant, extreme partisan gerrymandering scheme we have seen in modern history. I see the papers in front of you. I know what's going on in Virginia. And the American people are starting to see it too. You talk about justice and fair maps in front of these cameras, but behind closed doors, you're redrawing lines in the middle of a decade just to wipe Republicans off the map. You want to take a competitive state, a state where I lost by less than 6 points, and turn it into a 10-to-1 Democrat landslide through raw, corrupt power. And then you have the audacity, the sheer nerve, to look at a Supreme Court that is actually following the Constitution and call them illegitimate. Trump's voice hardens. The only thing illegitimate in this room is the idea that you can lecture anyone about democratic norms while you're planning to pack the court the second you get the chance. You don't want a court, Hakeem. You want a rubber stamp. You want a political branch that just says yes to whatever radical agenda you can't win at the ballot box. Jeffries shifts his weight, his eyes darting for a moment to the clock on the wall, realizing he has walked directly into a trap of his own making. We are doing what is necessary to protect the franchise from a radicalized Republican Party that refuses to accept the 21st century. And if that means maximum warfare, your own words, Hakeem, don't forget, you said it then. That's exactly what the people are going to get. Trump smiles again, broader this time. The kind of smile a hunter gives when the prey finally walks into the clearing. Maximum warfare. There it is again. The real Hakeem Jeffries. Not the defender of norms, not the protector of the voiceless, but the man of maximum warfare. That is exactly who the American people are going to see when they go to the polls in 2026. They're going to see a man who hates our institutions, who hates our highest court, and who hates the idea that the law applies to him just as much as it applies to everyone else. You can keep calling the court illegitimate, you can keep trying to rig the maps, but you're not fighting me, Hakeem. You're fighting the Constitution itself. And let me tell you something. The Constitution is a lot stronger than your partisan games. And so are the American people. The narrator leans back, the sound of Trump's words echoing through the radio speakers like a tolling bell for the swamp's latest scheme. The first encounter has ended, but the trap has been set, and the maximum warfare the left promised is starting to look a lot like a suicide mission for their own credibility. We're just getting started, folks, because when you pull back the curtain on the radical left, all you find is a desperate grab for power and a deep-seated fear of the truth. The atmosphere in the hearing room shifts, turning from a tense political debate into something far more theater-heavy as Hakeem Jeffries reaches for the oldest weapon in the radical left's arsenal. It is the race card, played with the practiced solemnity of a high priest, designed to shut down logic and replace it with raw, unearned moral outrage. The narrator watches as Jeffries leans back, his eyes searching for the red tally light of the main network camera, ensuring his performance reaches every television screen from Manhattan to San Francisco. He doesn't just want to win an argument, he wants to excommunicate the Supreme Court from the Church of American Democracy. We have to speak plainly about the ghosts that have been invited back into this chamber by a court that has abandoned its duty to the people. Jeffries begins, his voice dropping into a low, rhythmic cadence. When we look at what happened in Louisiana, when we see the intentional dismantling of districts that gave a voice to those who have been silenced for generations, we aren't just looking at a legal ruling. We are looking at the systematic erasure of the progress bought with the blood, sweat, and tears of giants like John Lewis and Rosa Parks. Think about those names. Lewis, Parks. They didn't march across bridges and refuse to move to the back of the bus so that a group of unelected judges could tell us that race doesn't matter. In 2026, he pauses for effect, allowing the names of civil rights icons to shield his partisan agenda like a suit of moral armor. What the court did in Louisiana by striking down that second majority black district is nothing less than an attempt to bring Jim Crow back into the halls of power, draped in the robes of constitutionalism. It is a separate but equal philosophy for the digital age, a way to ensure that minority voters are packed, cracked, and ultimately ignored so that the radical right can maintain its grip on the steering wheel of this country. This is how the sausage is made in the Trump court. They take a scalpel to the Voting Rights Act until there is nothing left but a hollow shell, all while pretending to be colorblind. The narrator notes the calculated cruelty of the comparison. The way Jeffries attempts to equate a complex redistricting ruling with the era of lynchings and literacy tests, it is a desperate move. A way to distract from the 10-to-1 gerrymander he is currently engineering in Virginia. But Donald Trump isn't letting the distraction stand. Trump doesn't look offended. He looks like a man who has just seen a desperate gambler go all in on a pair of twos. You know, Hakeem, I've heard that speech before, and frankly, the American people are tired of being told that every time they follow the law, they're somehow being bigots, Trump says, his voice cutting through the performative gloom like a spotlight. It's a very sad thing to see you stand there and use the names of real heroes, people who actually suffered, people who actually fought for this country to cover up a dirty political power grab. You talk about John Lewis and Rosa Parks, but let's be honest, you're not following in their footsteps. You're just standing on their shoulders to reach for more power for the Democrat Party. Trump leans forward. Let's look at what the court actually said, instead of the fairy tale you're trying to sell to the evening news. Justice Alito wrote the majority opinion, and he was very clear about the how the sausage is made part that you're so worried about. He looked at the map your allies drew in Louisiana, and he saw a district that looked like a snake winding through the state, specifically designed to hit a racial quota regardless of any traditional map-making rule. The court said, and they were right, that you cannot draw snake-like districts purely based on race, because that itself is a form of discrimination. It violates the Equal Protection Clause. Hakeem, you remember that one, don't you? It says the government has to treat everyone the same, not divide them into little boxes based on their skin color to help you win an election. Jeffries tries to interject, his face flushing with a mix of anger and the realization that his moral shield is being dismantled by a man who actually read the ruling. The Voting Rights Act requires that we ensure representation for communities that have been historically. The Voting Rights Act doesn't require you to violate the Constitution to get an extra seat in Congress, which is exactly what you were trying to do. Trump fires back, refusing to give him an inch of ground. The court isn't bringing Jim Crow back, Hakeem. They're stopping you from bringing a new kind of racial division into the 21st century. They are stopping you from turning race into a tool to divide the country and rig the maps, which is your entire strategy for 2026, because you can't win on the merits of your ideas. When you equate a ruling that says, "Stop discriminating based on race," with the horrors of the past, you are insulting the real civil rights heroes of this country. You're telling the American people that the only way for the system to be fair is if it's rigged in your favor based on identity politics. Trump shakes his head in disgust. And you know what? Most Americans, black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter, they see through it. They know that drawing a snaky district to pack voters together is just a different kind of swamp game. The narrator watches Jeffries' hands tremble slightly as he looks down at his notes, his Jim Crow narrative failing to land the knockout blow he expected. The room is silent now, the weight of Trump's counterattack hanging over the dais, exposing the hollow core of the left's identity-based rhetoric. You can keep playing that card, Hakeem, but it's losing its power because people are waking up to the fact that you're the one obsessed with race, not the court. Trump declares, the court is interested in the Constitution. They're interested in the law. They're interested in the text that has kept this country together for over 2 centuries. You're interested in maximum warfare and 10-to-1 landslides in Virginia, and you'll use any name, any icon, and any lie to get there. But you're insulting the intelligence of every voter in this country when you tell them that following the Constitution is the same as the dark days of our history. It's offensive, it's cynical, and it's the reason people have lost faith in your leadership. The narrator observes the shift in the gallery. Even the mainstream journalists are looking down at their laptops, unable to find a way to spin this particular exchange in Jeffries' favor. Trump has successfully stripped away the moral veneer of the left's argument, leaving nothing but the raw partisan ambition underneath. The race card has been played, and for the first time in a long time, it has been trumped by a simple, colorblind adherence to the rule of law. Jeffries sits back, on his mouth a thin line of silent fury, as he realizes the Trump court isn't just a talking point, it's a wall he can't climb with his usual rhetoric. We're going to move on now, Hakeem, because I think the American people have heard enough about your version of history, Trump concludes, leaning back with a look of absolute command. Let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about the borders you've left wide open, and the law enforcement you've abandoned, while you were busy worrying about snaky districts. The battle for the soul of the Republic continues, and the left's most effective weapon just shattered against the hard truth of the Constitution. The narrator smiles to himself, knowing that for the viewers at home, the curtain hasn't just been pulled back, it's been torn down. The air in the room tonight is thick with the scent of an impending collapse, the kind of heavy, electric charge you feel right before a massive structure gives way under its own weight. Hakeem Jeffries is still leaning back, trying to maintain that look of practiced Ivy League superiority, but his eyes are darting toward the exits, as if he's looking for a scripted interruption that isn't coming. Donald Trump, however, isn't finished with the lecture. In fact, he has just reached the part of the program where the smoking gun is pulled from the cabinet and laid bare for the world to see. He reaches into a leather portfolio at his side, pulling out a large, glossy map of Virginia that looks less like a political boundary and more like a crime scene covered in jagged, colorful ink. The narrator watches as Trump doesn't just hand it over. He tosses the map onto the mahogany table with a sharp, resonant slap that echoes through the hushed gallery like a judge's gavel. You want to talk about fairness, Hakeem? You want to talk about the will of the people and the sanctity of the vote while you stand on a stage built of lies? Let's talk about Virginia. Let's talk about the absolute heist your party is pulling off in the dark of night while you lecture us on democracy. Jeffries stares at the map, his jaw tightening as he recognizes the intricate snaking lines of the new redistricting plan his allies pushed through mid-decade. Normally, we redraw maps every 10 years after the census, like the Constitution intended, Trump states. But that wasn't fast enough for the radical left, was it? No, you couldn't wait until the end of the decade because you knew the American people were onto your game. So, you forced a constitutional amendment in Virginia to redraw the maps right now. And look at the result. Look at what you've done to a state that is basically purple, a state where I lost by less than 6 points. You took a fair, competitive 6-5 delegation, and you've engineered a 10-1 Democrat landslide through raw, corrupt map-making. Trump points a finger at a specific mangled section of the map where the colors overlap in a chaotic mess of partisan engineering. Look at this right here. Hakeem. Look at Prince William County. This is a single county, a community of people who live together and work together. And you've sliced it. You've torn it into 5 different congressional districts. 5. Why would anyone do that? Why would you split a single county into 5 pieces unless you were trying to dilute the Republican vote until it disappears entirely? You've packed Republicans into one corner and then spread the rest so thin that they don't have a prayer of being heard in the other 4 seats. The narrator notes the irony in Trump's voice, a razor-sharp sarcasm directed at the man who just spent an hour crying about voter suppression in Louisiana. This is the most blatant, the most extreme partisan gerrymander in modern American history, and it's happening right under your nose. You scream about a snake-like district in Louisiana that was struck down for being unconstitutional, but you're drawing a whole nest of vipers in Virginia. Is this your idea of saving democracy? Is this the fairness you're promising the American people for 2026? Jeffries tries to find his voice, clearing his throat and attempting to retreat back into the safety of his prepared talking points about representational equity. The voters of Virginia passed that referendum to ensure their maps reflected the changing demographics of the Commonwealth. We are simply correcting the historical imbalances that have kept people from having an equal say in their government for too long. Trump cuts him off with a dismissive wave, his laughter echoing against the marble walls like a bucket of cold water on a dying fire. Changing demographics? Correcting imbalances? That's swamp speak for we're losing the argument, so we're changing the rules. You can't win on your policies, not with open borders, not with high prices, and certainly not with your hatred for our institutions. So you rig the maps instead. You call the Supreme Court illegitimate because they stopped you from discriminating based on race, but you think it's perfectly legitimate to rig a whole state 10-1? You talk about the heroes of the civil rights movement, but I don't think John Lewis fought for you to sit in a back room and slice counties into 5 pieces for partisan gain. The narrator observes the sweat beginning to bead on Jeffries' forehead, the harsh lights of the hearing room finally exposing the cracks in the leftist armor. It's a seat heist, plain and simple, Trump says, and it's the ultimate proof of your maximum warfare strategy. You use those words yourself. Maximum warfare everywhere, all the time. And now we see exactly what you meant by it. It means you'll destroy the Supreme Court, you'll defund the police, and you'll rig every map in the country if it helps you stay in power. You don't care about norms. You don't care about fairness. And you certainly don't care about the voters in Prince William County who just had their voices erased. Trump leans back, crossing his arms, looking at Jeffries with the calm satisfaction of a man who has just played the ace of spades. The American people are smarter than you think, Hakeem. They can see the map, they can see the math, and they can see the hypocrisy. You can cry about voter suppression all day on the news, but this map is the smoking gun that tells the real story of the modern Democrat Party. You're not saving democracy. You're trying to auction it off to the highest partisan bidder before the 2026 midterms. The narrator leans into the microphone, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carries the weight of 1,000 town hall meetings. This is the moment where the Save Democracy mask falls off, and the raw, unwashed face of partisan ambition is revealed for everyone to see. They want you to look at Louisiana so you won't notice what they're doing in Virginia. But the receipts are on the table, and the numbers don't lie. 6-5 was competitive. 10-1 is a dictatorship by map-making, and they're doing it with a smile on their faces and a lecture in their pockets. Jeffries looks at the map on the table as if it were a ticking bomb, realizing that his rhetoric has just been dismantled by a piece of paper and a bit of basic arithmetic. We will defend the legality of these maps in court, and we will win, Jeffries mutters, though the conviction in his voice has vanished, replaced by a hollow, desperate defiance. Go ahead. Try it. The Supreme Court is waiting, and I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear how tearing a county into 5 pieces is traditional redistricting. But I forgot, you've already declared them illegitimate. So I guess the law doesn't matter to you anyway, does it? Trump's final jab lands with the weight of a sledgehammer, leaving the room in a stunned, heavy silence that the mainstream media will struggle to spin tomorrow. The narrator watches as Jeffries looks away, unable to meet Trump's gaze, knowing that the smoking gun in Virginia has just blown a hole through the left's entire narrative. The battle lines are drawn, the map is exposed, and the truth is finally sitting out in the open for every American to judge. We're moving into the deep end of the swamp now, folks, and the water is getting very, very cold for Hakeem Jeffries and his maximum warfare allies. The room grows cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the sudden, sharp realization that we are no longer talking about lines on a map, but about the lives of the men and women who keep this country breathing. Hakeem Jeffries shifts in his seat, his eyes hardening as he tries to pivot away from the smoking gun of the Virginia gerrymander and onto what he believes is the moral high ground of his party's radical agenda. He looks directly into the lens of the camera, trying to summon a look of righteous indignation, though it comes across as more of a desperate scramble to justify the indefensible. We have to talk about the Department of Homeland Security, and we have to talk about why that shutdown happened. Because it wasn't about politics, it was about our soul as a nation. The Democratic Party made a choice, a difficult choice, but a necessary one to stand up against a system of state-sponsored brutality that has no place in a civilized society. We refuse to provide a single dime of taxpayer money to fuel a violent mass deportation machine that tears families apart and stalks our communities like a predator. For us, this wasn't. The silence that follows the exposure of the Virginia map is heavy, but it is nothing compared to the cold, calculated silence that gripped the Department of Homeland Security for over 2 agonizing months. Imagine the sheer audacity required to sit in a climate-controlled room in D.C., while thousands of American families are left wondering how they will pay their mortgages or buy groceries. Hakeem Jeffries leans into the microphone now, his face tightening into a mask of righteous indignation, as if he is about to deliver a Sermon on the Mount rather than a justification for institutional sabotage. We have to draw a line somewhere, and for the Democratic Party, that line is drawn at the basic dignity of the human person. He begins, his voice trembling with a carefully rehearsed performative rage. We could not, in good conscience, continue to provide a blank check to what has essentially become a violent mass deportation machine. This wasn't just a budget dispute, it was a matter of conscience, a refusal to be complicit in the machinery of fear that ICE has become under this administration. We were willing to let the funding lapse because the alternative was to continue funding the terrorization of communities across this country. The narrator watches as Jeffries settles back, looking satisfied with his moral posturing, seemingly oblivious to the glaring contradiction he just uttered. It is truly a marvel of modern political theater to hear a man talk about conscience while he is effectively holding a gun to the head of the nation's security apparatus. His conscience apparently didn't extend to the TSA agents who were showing up at airports every morning, patting down passengers and screening luggage for 60 days without a single dime in their bank accounts. His conscience didn't seem to cover the men and women of the Coast Guard patrolling our waters and intercepting drug shipments while their own families were forced to rely on food pantries to survive. And where was this vaunted conscience when FEMA was left in a state of limbo, unable to fully fund disaster relief efforts for Americans who had lost everything to storms and fires? The radical left would have you believe that their hatred for immigration enforcement is a moral virtue, even when that hatred requires them to paralyze the entire Department of Homeland Security. They celebrate the fact that they managed to reopen most of the department while starving ICE of every single penny. As if leaving our borders unprotected is a victory for the American people. Donald Trump watches Jeffries with a look of grim amusement, the kind of look a veteran detective gives a criminal who just confessed to the crime while trying to claim he was the victim. A violent mass deportation machine. Is that really what you're calling the men and women who are the only thing standing between your family and some of the most dangerous people on the planet? Trump asks, his voice low and dangerous. It is incredible to me that you can sit here and lecture anyone about conscience when you just spent 2 months sabotaging our national security because you hate the law. You talk about a machine of violence. But let's look at who these people actually arrest every single day while you're busy writing press releases about your conscience. They are arresting human traffickers who are selling young girls into slavery. Are those the people you're trying to protect? They are breaking up drug smuggling rings that are flooding our streets with fentanyl and killing our children by the thousands. Is that the machinery of fear you're so worried about? They are removing gang members and convicted criminals, murderers and rapists from our communities so that American citizens can walk down their own streets in peace. And you call them violent? You call the people who enforce our laws brutal while you celebrate the people who break them? Trump glares across the table. You were willing to let the TSA, the Coast Guard, and FEMA rot in limbo just to make sure that ICE didn't have the resources to do its job. You held Homeland Security hostage for over 2 months because you care more about protecting illegal aliens than you do about paying the Americans who actually keep us safe. Jeffries tries to shift the narrative, his eyes darting toward the cameras as he attempts to regain the high ground he has already lost. We support law enforcement. But we do not support a radicalized agency that operates outside the norms of a civilized society. We managed to reopen DHS without giving ICE a dime in that bill, and that is a testament to our commitment to a different vision of security. Trump shakes his head, his smile disappearing, replaced by a cold, hard stare that seems to pin Jeffries to his seat. A different vision of security? You mean no security? You mean open borders? You mean a country where the laws don't matter as long as the radical left is happy? You celebrated this, Hakeem. You actually put out a statement bragging that you forced through funding for everything except immigration enforcement. You use budget reconciliation as a weapon to try to bypass the will of the people who actually want a secure border. The reality is that you hate ICE more than you love this country's safety, and you proved it by shutting down the very department meant to protect us. You talk about maximum warfare, and this is exactly what it looks like. You're willing to hurt American workers and compromise our defenses just to score a point for your base. It's dysfunction, it's a mess, and it is entirely the fault of a Democratic Party that would rather see the system burn than see the laws enforced. The narrator leans into the microphone, his tone dripping with the same chasm of disbelief that many Americans feel when they look at the state of their capital. Think about the hierarchy of values on display here. To the modern radical left, an ICE agent arresting a gang member is violent, but a TSA agent working without pay is just collateral damage for the cause. They call it a matter of conscience to stop deportations. But where is the conscience for the victims of the crimes that those deportations would have prevented? They claim to care about communities of color, yet they are the ones fighting to keep the very criminals who prey on those communities within our borders. The hypocrisy isn't just a byproduct of their strategy. It is the strategy itself, a constant inversion of reality, where the protectors are the villains and the lawbreakers are the heroes. Jeffries remains silent for a moment, his jaw set, but he has no answer for the reality of the human traffickers and drug rings that Trump has placed at the center of the debate. We will continue to fight for an immigration system that reflects American values, Jeffries finally mutters, though the words feel hollow in the wake of the facts. American values? Since when did it become an American value to defund the people who catch child predators while leaving our border guards without a paycheck? Trump asks, his voice echoing in the chamber. You can't make this up. The sheer audacity to lecture me on values while you're orchestrating the destruction of our institutions from the inside. The American people are watching. Hakeem, they saw the shutdown, they saw the missed paychecks, and they see exactly who you're fighting for. And let me tell you, it isn't them. The hearing room feels smaller now, the weight of the 2-month betrayal pressing down on the proceedings as the true cost of the left's maximum warfare becomes undeniable. The narrator looks directly into the camera lens, or perhaps just into the soul of the listener, with a final, cutting thought. This is the climax of cruelty. Not the enforcement of the law, but the intentional abandonment of the people who enforce it. When you hold the safety of a nation hostage for a political agenda, you aren't a leader, you're a captor. And the American people are tired of being held captive by the radical left's conscience. The shadows in the hearing room are growing longer now, much like the shadows falling over the radical left's desperate hopes for the 2026 midterm. The narrator leans in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that carries the weight of a secret unearthed from the deepest corners of the swamp. You see, folks, when people like Hakeem Jeffries think the microphones are off, or when they're speaking to their own echo chamber on a friendly podcast, the mask doesn't just slip. It falls off entirely. We've seen the clips, and we've heard the whispers that they thought would stay within the radical circles of the ivory towers. Jeffries sat there, comfortable in his partisan skin, and told the world that if the Democrats take back Congress in 2026, everything is on the table. He said it with a smirk, a calculated nod to the activists who want to burn the American system to the ground and rebuild it in their own twisted image. But we know exactly what everything means in the language of the radical left. It's a coded invitation to a funeral for the United States Constitution. It is the blueprint for court packing, a scheme so radical that even the old guard of the Democrat Party used to be afraid to mention it in public. They want to add seats to the Supreme Court until they have enough rubber stamps to pass every unconstitutional whim they can dream up. They want to turn the final arbiter of law into a political branch that takes orders from the DNC headquarters. And it doesn't stop at packing the court. They're talking about term limits for justices, not because they care about fresh perspectives, but because they want to purge the judges who actually read the law. They want to destroy the independence of the judiciary so they can ensure that no matter how the people vote, the swamp always wins. It is a total assault on the separation of powers and an attempt to turn the third branch of government into a partisan department of the radical left. Donald Trump leans across the table, his eyes fixed on Jeffries with an intensity that seems to pierce through the carefully constructed lies. I heard you on that podcast, Hakeem. I heard the way you talked about the court when you thought the deplorables weren't listening. You said everything is on the table, which is just a fancy way of saying you're planning a coup against the judicial branch of the United States. You want to pack the court with radical ideologues who will do what you can't get done at the ballot box because your ideas are a disaster. You're talking about term limits and reforming the court, but we all know you just want to get rid of the people who tell you no when you try to violate the rights of the American people. Jeffries tries to maintain his composure, but there is a visible twitch in his jaw as he realizes his secret agenda is being broadcast to the very people he wants to disenfranchise. We are discussing ways to ensure that the court reflects the modern values of a diverse America rather than the outdated whims of a privileged few, Jeffries replies, his voice strained and defensive. The American people are tired of a court that acts as a roadblock to progress and a protector of the powerful. Trump lets out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoes through the room like a crack of thunder. Roadblock to progress? That's what you call the Constitution now? You don't want a court that reflects values. You want a court that reflects your donor list. The reason you're panicking, the reason you're talking about blowing up the system, is because you know you're losing the argument on the merits. The 2026 midterms are coming, and you're terrified because my policies are working, and yours are a nightmare. The narrator observes the shift in the room, the palpable sense of dread coming from the Democrat staffers in the back. They know Trump is right. They can feel the ground shifting beneath their feet as the 2026 cycle begins to loom. The economy is strengthening, the border security has improved dramatically, and the wins are stacking up like a mountain they can't climb. Inflation is cooling, energy prices are dropping, and the American worker is finally feeling like they have a fighter in the ring again. Meanwhile, the left has nothing to run on except fear, division, and the hope that they can rig enough maps and pack enough courts to stay relevant. You're panicking because the border is finally getting secured. And that was your entire plan for a permanent majority? Wasn't it? Trump continues, his voice growing louder and more commanding. You're panicking because the economy is booming and people aren't buying the victim narrative you've been selling for decades. So now you've decided to attack the refs because you can't win the game. You call the Supreme Court illegitimate. You try to rig the maps in Virginia 10-1. And now you're plotting to destroy the judiciary itself. You want to change the rules because you can't win with ideas. And it's as simple and as ugly as that. Trump points his finger at Jeffries. But let me tell you something, Hakeem, and I want you to listen very carefully, because this is the message you're going to hear all the way to 2026. The American people see exactly what you're doing, and they aren't going to let you burn this system down just because you're losing an election. They aren't going to let you turn our highest court into a political circus just because you don't like being told that the Constitution still matters. Jeffries stands up, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and the sheer weight of being exposed in front of the nation. The tide of history is moving away from your brand of politics, and we will do whatever is necessary to ensure the future belongs to us, he declares, his voice reaching a fever pitch of partisan zeal. Trump remains calm, looking up at Jeffries with the expression of a man who has already won the battle of wills. History doesn't belong to the people who rig the maps and pack the courts. It belongs to the people who have the courage to stand up for the truth. You keep talking about maximum warfare, but you've forgotten that the American people are the ones who decide when the war is over, and in 2026, they're going to send a message that you'll never forget. The narrator watches as Jeffries gathers his papers and marches out of the room, followed by his phalanx of frantic aides. The hearing room is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a victory that hasn't happened yet, but is already inevitable. The radical left's everything is on the table. Strategy has been laid bare for the world to see, and it turns out it's just a table full of broken promises and partisan power grabs. The future of 2026 isn't going to be decided by court packing or gerrymandering. It's going to be decided by the voters who are tired of being lied to. Trump stands up, adjusts his tie, and walks toward the exit with a steady, confident stride. He knows the fight is far from over, but he also knows that the American people are finally waking up to the maximum warfare being waged against them. The shadows are still there, but the light of the truth is starting to burn through the fog of the swamp. And as any viewer of this channel knows, once you see the truth, you can never go back to believing the lies. The dust is finally settling in this hall of echoes, but the stench of the radical left's desperation still lingers in the air. What we witnessed today wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of two entirely different visions for the future of our nation. On one side, you have Hakeem Jeffries, the poster child for raw, unadulterated partisan power, a man who views the law only as a weapon to be wielded against his political enemies. He represents the maximum warfare crowd, the ones who think the Constitution is a suggestion and the Supreme Court is an obstacle to be cleared. On the other side, you have Donald Trump, standing as the last line of defense for the original intent of our founding documents. He represents the preservation of the Republic, the idea that the rules apply to everyone, even the elites in Washington who think they're untouchable. The hearing room is buzzing now, a low hum of panicked whispers from the staffers who just watched their boss get dismantled on national television. Trump doesn't wait for a closing gavel or a permission slip from the committee chair to have the final word. He gathers his things with the deliberate, calm movements of a man who has already delivered the knockout blow. He stands up, towering over the table while Jeffries remains slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the map of Virginia that proved his own hypocrisy. Trump pauses, looking directly into the main camera one last time, his voice cutting through the noise like a jagged blade. Let's be very clear about where we go from here, because the stakes couldn't be higher for every person watching at home. The year 2026 is not going to be just another ordinary election cycle where we trade talking points and campaign ads. It is going to be a national referendum on the very soul of this country. It is a choice about whether we remain a nation of laws or whether we let people like Hakeem Jeffries turn the United States into a third-rate banana republic, a place where the courts are packed, the maps are rigged, and the people who protect our borders are treated like criminals while the lawbreakers are celebrated. Hakeem thinks he can declare maximum warfare on half the country and get away with it because the media covers for him. He thinks he can call our highest court illegitimate while he tries to steal seats in Virginia through backroom gerrymandering. He thinks he can shut down Homeland Security and leave our agents without pay just to protect his radical agenda. But the American people aren't as low IQ as he wants them to be, and they see the hypocrisy clearly tonight. They see a man who would rather burn down our institutions than accept a fair ruling from the Supreme Court. They see a party that has abandoned its duty to the people in favor of a desperate grab for raw power. I've made my choice to stand with the Constitution, and I know the American people are making theirs right now. We are going to protect this republic. We are going to secure our borders, and we are going to make sure the law actually means something again. In 2026, the voters are going to give Hakeem the answer he deserves, and it's not going to be the one he's looking for. He turns and walks out, leaving a trail of silence in his wake as he exits the chamber. Jeffries is left behind in the ruins of his own rhetoric, a leader who declared maximum warfare only to find himself completely outgunned by the truth. But as we close the book on this chapter, we have to ask ourselves the question that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. How much longer can this mask of saving democracy hold up under the weight of so many lies? How long can the radical left hide their true intentions when the light of the truth is finally hitting their distorted maps and their sabotaged budgets? They thought they could operate in the shadows, but the shadows are disappearing. And in the bright, harsh light of reality, all that's left is a choice: the Republic or the swamp. I know where I stand, and after tonight, I think I know where you stand.